Chapter 1, Mishnah 4. In the previous Mishnahs, we have learned that in a field of trees, the entire Beis Sa'ah may be plowed after Pesach of the 6th year. For a field to be considered a field of trees, there must be 3 trees growing in the field. In addition, each tree must be large enough to produce a block of dried figs. This Mishnah discusses this further and teaches the law that applies when the trees do not meet this requirement. We now turn to the words of the Mishnah. If one of the trees produces a block of pressed figs, but the other 2 do not produce that amount, or even if 2 of the trees produce that amount, but one does not produce that amount, we may plow for the trees only as much as their individual needs, i.e. their immediate surroundings, and not the entire Sa'ah. Since not all the trees are large enough, the field is not considered a field of trees. The Mishnah teaches that this requirement, that each tree must be large enough to produce a block of dried figs, does not always apply. The requirement that each tree must be large enough to produce a block of dried figs, that applies when the field contains between 3 and 9 trees. However, if there were 10 or more than 10 trees in the field, then regardless of whether they produce the minimum amount of fruit or they do not produce the minimum amount of fruit, we may plow the entire Beis Sa'ah for their benefit. That is, a field of 10 or more trees is considered a field of trees regardless of the amount that the trees produce. The Mishnah stated earlier that if the 3 trees do not meet the minimum size requirement, only their immediate area must be plowed, not the entire Beis Sa'ah. The Mishnah brings the source for the prohibition of plowing the rest of the Beis Sa'ah. This is because it is stated in Exodus chapter 34, Mishnah 21, 6 days ye shall work, and on the 7th day ye shall rest. During plowing and during harvesting ye shall rest. Now, the first words of the verse are obviously speaking about Shabbos. The final words, during plowing and during harvesting ye shall rest, however, are puzzling. These words, too, seem to be speaking about Shabbos. But that is difficult, since the prohibition to plow and harvest and to perform all labor on Shabbos has already been taught elsewhere in the Torah. Apparently then, the final words of the verse are referring to the year of Shemitah, rather than to Shabbos. And the verse is speaking about the prohibitions of plowing and harvesting during Shemitah. But there is no need for this verse to teach that plowing and harvesting are prohibited during the actual year of Shemitah, for that too is stated in the Torah. Rather, the verse is prohibiting plowing on the eve of Shemitah, i.e. the 6th year, whose effect enters Shemitah, that is, plowing during the 6th year for the benefit of a crop that will be harvested in the 7th year, as well as harvesting the 7th year's crop that was either planted unlawfully or that grew on its own from seeds accidentally left on the ground, that extends into the year following Shemitah. Thus, the verse teaches A, that plowing before Shemitah is prohibited if the crop will be harvested during Shemitah, and B, that harvesting the Shemitah crop is prohibited even after Shemitah. Another Tana disagrees with this interpretation. Rabbi Ishmael says, the verse is not referring to Shemitah, but rather to Shabbos. Although the prohibition of plowing and harvesting on Shabbos is already known, it is mentioned here to compare the prohibition of plowing on Shabbos to the prohibition of harvesting on Shabbos, and to teach the following. Just as the plowing that the Torah prohibits on Shabbos is voluntary, that is, it cannot be speaking of a case where there is a mitzvah obligating a person to plow, since there is no case in the Torah where there is a requirement to plow, so too the harvesting that the Torah prohibits on Shabbos is voluntary. That is, the prohibition excludes harvesting barley for the Omer offering, which is a mitzvah. The verse thus teaches that it is permitted even on Shabbos.